Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining on this beautiful Friday. And today is our second webinar in our series. And this webinar is called Look, My Baby Can Move. And we are going to focus as parents how we can support our baby's first movements. And our speaker for today is Munira Kantawala, and she is a pediatric physiotherapist, and she is with Playful Strides Therapy. And with me, I also have Rekha Anam, who is the co-founder and CEO of Bujjify, and my name is Rohit Jinka, and I am a co-founder and president of Bujjify. And moving on to the next slide. So during this session, we are going to talk about who we are. We'll start with the introduction of for Bujjify, and then Munir will talk about the changes that will happen between 4 and 7 months, focusing on movements that will happen during this time. We are going to basically talk about the milestones at 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, 7 months mark, and then we'll open for Q&A. So just a quick note that we have a question and answers tab here. Please feel free to type in your questions, and when we get to the Q&A section, we are going to talk about your questions, and Munira is going to answer, and then we'll move on. Okay, moving on to the next one. So let's start with the introduction. Who are we? So our company is Bujjify, and it's pronounced as Bujjify. Basically, we are a child development company that is dedicated on providing a healthy and well-rounded child development right from the birth. And our products are called play rigs. They are basically toolkits that are created based on the scientific research and expert advice, and they are inspired on Montessori philosophy. So each play rig, it's tailored to a specific age, and it has all the tools and all the toys that are essential for that developmental stage of the baby. So with this, we aim to help the parents by giving the right tools at the right time so that parents don't have to do all this research by themselves, and then they can just focus on spending the time with the baby, working with the baby, and see them grow. And then moving on, these are our products. We are calling them play rigs. So each play rig is for 2 months, and each of the play rig, it supports exactly what's needed at that stage. For example, the newborn play rig, it has a lot of black and white accents to support the vision development at 1 and 2 months. And then the second one is a rollover play rig. It has all the necessary elements to support tummy time and things like that. So basically preparing the baby to roll over and encourage the baby to do a lot more tummy time. Similarly, we have like crawler play rig, 5 to 6 months, listener play rig, 7 to 8, the builder play rig, 9 to 10, and solver play rig, 11 to 12 months. So right now, we launched our company with products from 0 to 12 months. So that's 6 play rigs in total. But of course, in future, we have plans to expand it further. With that, I will hand it over to Munira.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Munira Kantawala. I am a pediatric physiotherapist and I am a part of Playful Strides Therapy. We are a pediatric occupational therapy and physiotherapy clinic based out of Milton, Ontario. We service children from 0 to 18 years of age and we treat a variety of conditions. Our specialties are feeding therapy, early intervention, pediatric pelvic floor incontinence, bladder bowel training, interoception, and we have like occupational therapists and physiotherapists in our team who service children in the neurodiverse population. And given today's presentation and webinar, we are focusing on the early intervention piece, which is development for 4 to 6 months of age, right? Okay. So in our previous presentation, we spoke about development from 0 to 3 months of age. Here we saw what children do as newborns. And we also saw that children are, mostly come up from a cramped space and they kind of work from a flexion position, which is totally crouched, and they start moving towards extension. So in 4 to 6 months of age, we're going to see a lot of the extension position, what children do on the floor in this position, how they move into various positions, and how they move from like a lying position and go more and more against gravity, which is sitting. All right. Rohit, can you move to the next slide? So here we're talking about rolling and exploring. At 4 months of age, your child should be able to have good head control. Like typically, this happens around 4 months of age. Some children develop head control early, some children develop it a little later, depending on whatever the development is, what the child's journey has been from 0 to 3 months of age. At 4 months, you'll typically see that children have really good head control. So, what are the signs that tell you that a child is ready for the events and all the milestones that happen at 4 months? Is like you can see in the first picture, when you hold your child up, your child has good head control. You don't need to support your child's head when you're holding your child in your arms. Okay, so that this typically happens at 4 months of age. The other thing is when your child is in tummy time, your your child can really support his or herself on the forearms, and they have good head control again in tummy time. They're looking around, exploring their environment, and from there they learn to roll over, roll onto their back, and they learn to grab for toys and things like that. This happens from like 5-6 months of age. Around 5-6 months onwards, children start sitting up much more. They start developing a lot more control against gravity. So when they're upright and vertical, they have more control. Uh, Typically, what we see is when you put a child into sitting. Okay, when you pick a child up and prop a child up into sitting, one of the first things that children will do is they'll put their hands down and they'll sort of go into this tripod sitting position, which is with the hands down on the bums. They may or may not have the best amount of control in sitting, like they'll plop down and then slowly, gradually, they learn to come up against gravity. Okay, so these are a gist of things that you'll probably see developmentally in the 4 to 7 month age group. All right, and now we'll go ahead and we'll kind of break it down month wise and see what to expect at each month. Next slide. So at 4 months, what you will typically see with your child. Okay, so at 4 months, you see a child who smiles to get your attention, who looks at you, moves and makes sounds to get your attention. There's a lot more cooing, eyeing. Uh, when parents are talking, especially mom is talking, or they hear sounds, they turn their head towards sounds. Like we discussed earlier, when they're on their tummy, they can lift their head with a lot of control. Like early on in 0 to 3 months, you would have noticed that they lift their head up, but it's not very controlled. It's quite a uncontrolled motion where they lift up and they'll go down. There's no finesse in the movement. But 4 months onward, you start seeing a lot more control and finesse. Like they can lift, they can turn to their sides, look around. When they're on their tummy, they can even focus on like people moving about or sounds, and they have good head control. Okay, and that is what we discussed. Like 4 months, head control really comes in. um, you'll also start seeing that they will attempt to swing and bat at toys. So at 4 months, when early on when you're putting toys in front of children, they really are not interested. There's no sort of interest in toys. They will not even lift their hands up to hit or something. From 4 months onwards, typically what you're going to see is that when there's a toy in front, a child will attempt to just bring the hands towards the center and bat the toy. They're still not grasping at toys, but they're just kind of batting at toys. Um, Prior to 4 months, hands and feet are something that a child really does not have a lot of awareness about. But 4 months onwards, you start seeing a lot more interest in infants and children with their hands and feet. They'll start bringing their hands to their mouth. As they get older, like around 6-7 months of age, they can even bring their feet to their mouth and they'll start licking on their toes. So that's how they get awareness of their body. They know that, oh, look, I have hands. Look, I have feet. I can do this. So what we saw initially was a child who was completely, flexed in this position, who had no awareness. Now we're seeing a lot more extension. The child is getting flatter. And then we're seeing a lot more control now. So they can lift their arms up. They can bring it, in front of their face. They can bring it to their mouth. They can lift their feet up. bring their feet to the mouth, and it's a controlled movement. It's not something that they don't have too much control over. Like at in the first 3 months of age, if you lift a child's hands up, they cannot hold it up, it'll like fall off, or the legs you lift up and you're controlling a lot of the movement. 4 month onwards, they have a lot more control of their limbs, their arms and their legs, right? They will also tend to push up on their forearms and their elbows when they're propped up on their tummy. And they also start push towards like the 7 month age, they'll also start to push up on their heads. All right. So, and why this is really important, we discussed tummy time in the 0 to 3 month age group, and we spoke about how tummy time is important for development. Here, what you see is that when children are propped up on their forearms and their elbows, they develop a lot of the trunk control, which is important for sitting. So, as a child is taking weight on the forearms and the elbows, they're getting that strength in their shoulders, in their trunk muscles, their chest muscles, which helps them to sit up straight in sitting. So we spoke about the tripod earlier, the sitting where they kind of plop down and they come up. This is how they learn to push up and they learn to keep their trunk up. So that's why the tummy time position is really important initially, because that is going to help them in sitting later on. Okay, so when we look at milestones, what we'll notice is that everything that a child does helps with another milestone later on. Like there is nothing that a child will just do randomly. Every activity, every movement is essential for development and achieving milestones later on. Right? Next slide. Okay. This is what we typically see in a child at like 5 months of age. Okay, so we're now just a minute. I'm gonna check my slides. Okay, so what we're noticing is that children are trying to sit up. Okay, and trying to sit up as in like this is not by themselves. When you prop a child up into sitting, this is how you'll typically have your child sitting. So they don't have a lot of control. They need a lot of back support. If there's no back support, they'll fall over. They'll tend to, they'll really shrug their shoulders like this and they'll hold on tight to whatever because they don't have that trunk control. You've just propped them up into sitting. So they are still learning to get that sitting control. A lot of times, like parents start putting their children up into sitting at 5 months of age, and it will take them like a month or so typically to get that good sitting control. It really does not, at 5 months, if you start, you're just building up on that sitting control. It does not come until around 6-7 months of age. Okay. Tummy time, what we're noticing now. Okay. So how does this child come into tummy time at 5 months? So from 4 to 5 months, what we're looking at is also the rolling. Okay. So as when a child in 4 months is like lying on the back and looking around, we spoke about turning the head, following, sounds and, the parents' faces and things like that. That also initiates a lot of the rolling. So as the head turns, it facilitates and it kind of encourages the body to turn as well. Okay. So children, what they'll do is they'll start turning and then they'll start looking at things. They'll start reaching for things and they'll want to go. And then the shoulders follow and then the hips follow and the legs follow. And then they learn to roll over. So if you're looking at a baby who's lying like this, so typically, the child will turn the head to one side. Okay, and lying on, I'll just show you guys like this so it's easier. So they turn and then the head first turns, they're trying to look, then they try to reach with their hands, the shoulders follow, and then the rest of the body follows. So this is a really stiff doll, so you really cannot make out, but everything works in segments. You do not have rolling where they just go over like that. The head needs to follow, then the shoulders follow, then the hips and the feet follow. Okay, that's how children learn to roll over, and this is something that happens with a lot of practice. And if you have children who are in this age group of 4 to 7, what you will be noticing right now is that they'll really try hard to they'll keep looking, they'll try hard, they'll turn their shoulders, they keep practicing over and over again, and eventually till they learn to kind of turn and roll over on their bellies. Then they go there and then they're stuck. They don't know what to do because the hands are stuck under the chest. Okay. So then again, that's when they get onto the tummy time. They learn to kind of take weight on the forearms and they explore and they're trying to figure out what to do in every position. Okay. Now, from 4 to 5 months at around 5 months, children have learned to kind of go from their back to their tummy. Okay. They've practiced a lot of lying on the tummy, turning over and getting onto the back. Now they've got onto the back and their hands are stuck here. So what are they going to do? So this is where the head turning sort of comes into play, because as you turn your head and as they turn their head, they learn to also kind of shift the weight side to side. And as the weight shifts, they can get their arms out. So if you guys have children who are in this 4 or 5 month age group and who are just about learning to roll over and get onto their tummies, don't rush into kind of getting their hands out. Okay, they will eventually learn to turn their head and they'll eventually learn to get their hands out. It's all a part of kind of exploring. And children are very explorative in nature. They will try to do things and figure things out on their own. Okay. And once they learn a skill, they just keep practicing and they keep doing it over and over again. Um, Rolling is a very, very essential skill for activities to do later on. Like if we have, for example, a child who wants to, later on, like a school going child who needs to bend down and tie their shoelaces. Or if you're trying to put your pants in, like when you're talking about dressing, this is a sort of an essential skill that we want to learn later on. You have to be able to turn and go down and do it, turn and go down. So children who typically do not roll in this pattern will have challenges dressing up, putting their shoes on, doing any activity that requires this rotation. Because if they've not learned it early on, it is going to impact on functions later on in life. So we always want to kind of encourage children to roll, and you want them to do it on their own as well. Okay. So from 4 to 5 months of age, we're looking at children who are essentially learning to kind of go from their back to their tummy and learning to play on their tummy. At this age, you'll also see them starting to reach out for toys when they're on their tummy. So they will try and kind of, lift their hands up, shift weight to one side and try and reach for things. They may or may not do it. So typically this happens. So like if your child is not doing it, don't kind of panic. They will eventually learn to do it. Okay. Next slide.
Yeah. Actually, like I just wanted to say that you just put light on such an important point, Munira, that every single thing that happens in a child life, especially at the early stage, how that helps them to succeed in the later life. And as parents, we may often think that, oh, that's a small thing, right? So just to move hand from here or take the hand out, it's a small thing for them, but then actually it has such a prominent role to play, and even in the later stages of life. So yeah, that's great.
Absolutely. Like we want to always kind of do the best for our kids, but they also need to learn and kind of explore and problem solve on their own. And these problem solving kind of skills come from this age. When you allow them to explore and figure things out on their own, they develop that sort of pattern going forward, and this skill remains with them. So
okay, moving on to the next one.
Okay. Now, 6 months. This is an awesome age. Children are way more independent. They're sitting up. They have really good sitting balance. You can do so many things at 6 months of age. You're probably even noticing that they're learning to kind of go from their belly. They're learning to roll back, and this is an age where you start seeing that they want to roll from like one end of the room to the other end. Like they do a lot of these alternating rolls. Okay. Again, it starts around 6 months of age and it goes on forward because once they learn to kind of get against gravity, they're more vertical. They don't really learn to crawl until much later. So as I mentioned earlier, children are explorative. So how are they going to move around? This is where they're going to go back on their tummy and they're going to roll from one side to the other. So if they want to get something, they'll roll onto their belly, then they'll roll back and they'll keep rolling, get something and roll back and come. Yeah. At around 6 months of age, typically what the first skill that children will develop is more coming out of their tummy and going onto their back. Okay, so 4 to 6 months is the typical age for rolling. Uh, for rolling, back to tummy comes first, and then tummy to back. So back to tummy is a relatively easier skill to achieve when done correctly. Tummy to back is a way more coordinated, complex skill. So first, children learn to go from the back to the tummy. Like I mentioned, they'll turn their head, then they'll sort of turn their shoulders. They've gotten on their tummy. Now on their tummy, they've learned to pull their hands out. They've learned to kind of take weight, learn to reach for toys. As they're doing this reaching in tummy time, what they are doing in, and we'll see a video ahead, and you will see, what I'm getting at is, as they're in this tummy time position and they tend to reach, they start shifting their weight side to side. Okay, as the weight shifts, it's again sort of turning the body, so the upper body is kind of going this way, and the more they try to reach or they go behind, they learn to do this. So they're on their tummy and they're shifting weight on one side and they're learning to roll back. This is a very complex skill and it requires a lot of control. So, as we said earlier, children are sort of in this 4 to 7 month age group. They're learning a lot of finesse in movement. They're learning to control their movement quite a bit. So, the more they work against gravity, they take weight on their forearms, they learn to control how to move their upper body, lower body, and eventually, like how they practice from back to tummy, they will keep moving this way and they eventually learn to roll back. Okay, so from tummy to back. And again, this is a very important skill. Why we want to work on like a lot of the tummy time and the rolling is think of a skill where you put your seatbelt. So you do this and you pull your seatbelt down, right? What is the action that you're doing? Is this. So if a child has not learned to roll over from the tummy, they will have difficulty doing this. Even when you're teaching children how to wipe themselves and clean themselves, they have to do a lot of this action. So the rolling from tummy to back basically gives you this movement, gives you the trunk control and the upper body rotation that is required for skills later on. Okay, so that's the rolling piece that children will learn from 4 to 6 months of age. Now, we did sitting early on, like at 5 months of age, if you're propped into sitting, how sitting looks like. But when you look at the pictures here and the images here, you see that the sitting is much more controlled. There's not a lot of holding on. The child is against gravity. There's no support around. So all of these things come as they develop that trunk control in learning how to go from their tummy to their back. They also build up a lot of this, trunk strength and upper body chest strength, which helps them in sitting up and maintaining sitting balance. Okay. So for a child who does not do a lot of rolling, that child will have some sort of concerns sitting up and balancing against, gravity without support. And at 6 months of age, still you're putting your child up into sitting. Okay, the child has still not learned how to come into sitting themselves. Okay, this happens a little later, which we'll discuss in our next segment. This happens around after 7 months of age. 7 to 8 months of age is when children learn to, and sometimes even 9 months. Like, so just before they learn to crawl, they will learn to come and sit up themselves. So depending on how quick a child is or how they've learned things, but it is almost after 7 months that a child learns to sit up on their own. So in this 4 to 7 month age, you're still propping your child up into sitting. Your child is not coming into sitting by themselves, and these are two very different things. So when we see children for early intervention, children who have delayed milestones, typically we'll ask a question, when did your child start sitting? And a lot of parents will say, oh, my child was sitting at 6 months of age. Then we kind of probe and say, did you put your child into sitting, or did your child learn to sit by themselves? And they'll be like, oh, no, we always put them into sitting. Like, they're still yet to learn how to come up themselves. So there's a big difference in sitting balance. One is just having that balance in sitting, and one is coming into sitting by themselves. Yeah? Right? Mm. Then from this age at 6 months, when they're sitting around, the first thing that they're learning is just balancing themselves. Okay. After this, after they've got this balance, then they learn to kind of reach for toys. They'll learn how to, again, if they've learned to roll, they'll able to like turn around and get things from other sides. So all of the sitting balance, and again, like the mastery of sitting kind of comes after they get that balance in one position. Then after that, they start exploring more in the sitting position. Right? Next slide, please. Okay, this is the video that I was talking about. So here what we see is that this is at around between 6-7 months of age. So this baby is, on the tummy, pushing up, turning the head, and as the head turns, the weight shifts from forearm to forearm. Okay. And you see the legs are a lot more extended, and there's a lot of control and, bending and extending, like straightening and bending of the knees that we're noticing. So that's, again, that finesse and movement that we were talking about. It is a lot more control. It's not just like, it's not like an all or nothing movement. We're going completely, all crouched or completely straight. Like the arms, legs, everything is moving independently and doing different movements in this position. Yeah. On the left, we have an image of the baby sitting, and this is a seating device that this baby is using. It's called the UpSeat, which is a really awesome invention, and it is something that we really recommend with children. And because like, we'll go ahead in the next slides, we'll see like what the differences are and why this is so important. But like, as you can see, the sitting position is really good. The baby's got like a tabletop, everything. This is also a position that children kind of, get ready to eat. Around this time, like 6-7 months, you're introducing solids in in a baby's meals. So this is a good position to start eating. 6 months onwards, when you're introducing solids, it's a lot of you're not introducing it with an expectation that the baby's going to have like 3-4 full meals. It's just an introduction, exploration of food, and you're just trying out different foods at this age. Yeah. So you start solids around this age, and for being ready for solids, there are certain criteria that you're looking at. A child has to have good head control. The child has to be sitting independently, and a child has to have interest in foods. When these three criteria are fulfilled, that is when you start kind of introducing solids with your child. Till if you don't have either of these, introducing solids and weaning from milk and liquids and moving to solids foods is not a really good idea. Yeah. And position, like I said, sitting independently, having good positioning and sitting, all of this is really important for solid foods. And from 6 months to 1 year of age, if they're just exploring with foods, at 1 year is when you're expecting them to have full meals. I'm not a feeding expert, Cathy is, and if you'll have any feeding questions, she'll address them later on, where feeding is concerned and things are concerned. So we spoke about sitting up. The next thing that we're looking at, the next big milestone that you're looking at in this age group, which typically would occur, and some babies have, some babies don't have, is that when they're sitting, they may learn to go down onto their tummy from sitting. Okay. So when children sit, and we spoke earlier about the mastery in sitting, where they're reaching out for things, they're turning, things like that. So what children will do at this age is that if there's a toy that's far away, or if they're interested in something that is, at a distance, they will learn to put their hands down, and they learn to walk on their hands, reach forward, and go for it. While doing this, what they accidentally discover is that from sitting, they can go onto their tummies. Okay. So they go from sitting to their tummies, and then they're stuck there because they still haven't learned to come up into sitting. So this is the age when they start sort of exploring, okay, now I was sitting, I've come down, how do I get up again? And then beyond 7 months is where they kind of learn to push up, and they learn to, they learn how to sit up. So at around 7 months of age, you're looking at sitting, and a child who learns to go from sitting into a lying down position, right? Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. So I'm sure a lot of you have, as new parents, you all have heard about the upseat, the bumbo, and there's like a lot of talk about which seating is good, at what age do you put a child into a seating device and things like that. So what we have found is that the bumbo is pretty common with parents, but the bumbo is not a really good seating device for children, because it really does not encourage a child to participate or have good trunk control, or even for the hip positioning, it's not really the best. Okay. It is very convenient because the child just plops into it and the child just stays there. There's no sort of muscle activation, or no no strategies or benefits that a child is getting out of that bumbo seat. In comparison, the upseat is it's ergonomically designed. It is meant for good seating position, for good posture, good hip positioning as well. Okay, we have the seats where I'll show you like what exactly it is. So this is like the upseat. It's a floor seat. This is for infants, and uh, once they graduate out of this, they go into a booster seat. So this is like a tabletop that. Squeeze on the side. Oh yeah. So the tabletop comes off, and so if you look at it, like if you look at, there's sort of a wedging over here. Okay, so it's not flat, it's a little inclined. Now what this does is that, as shown in the other picture, when there's that incline, it pushes the child to sit more upright. The child is not sitting tucked in like this. Anyone who's used a bumbo probably would have noticed that the child really does not sit up straight. They're like tucked down like this, and they're just stuck there. So there's no sort of core development that's happening within the bumbo. As opposed to the upseat, that is what it does. It helps the child sit up straighter, and because of the way this, the leg pieces are positioned, it also gives a lot of, it allows the hips to stay in a position that prevents the hips from going into dislocation. Okay. Now, hip dislocation is not something that commonly occurs with children, but uh, it just helps with hip development because the bones are not yet fused in infants. So you want to give like a good positioning. To put this into perspective, we tend to carry our children on the hips on the side. And they say that, okay, you can carry your child like this. It's a similar position. Okay. It opens up the hips. It gives like a good positioning of the hips. It's not straight. Yeah. So it's good for hip development basically. And the seating is also much straighter. So that's the difference then. We also have the booster seat. I think with the booster, you'll see this like, so this is, so if you see the booster, I'll show you. It's like, it's inclined. I don't know if you guys can make out.
Yeah,
But
it's visible.
this is a little low. This piece is a little lower. This is higher. So
Mm.
it's a wedging, and this is for older children. So eventually, when children are older, 18 months or 2 years, they graduate out of the floor seat, and this is a booster seat that can be used. And what I personally like about the upseat is that it is sort of a mobile high chair. So when you're traveling, a lot of times if you're traveling, you really cannot carry your high chair. So you can carry this up seat because it's small, it's compact. You can put it in your car. You can also put it on a chair. So people who have smaller houses, condos where they really cannot fit in a big high chair, you can put this up on your regular dining chair, and it acts as a high chair. You can use it while you're traveling, and you can move from like a floor seat to a booster pretty easily. Okay. Uh, The bumbo in comparison, yes, they have come up with different, the options. They also have like a tray table and they have boosters and things like that. But the way it's designed, it really does not help with good posture and sitting positioning. Okay, it does not help with core development, and core development is really, really essential for children and infants because that is how they learn to kind of go from one milestone to the other. So if children are tucked in here and sitting, the core is not going to develop, and it's going to make it all the more difficult to move to the next milestone.
Actually, it's pretty shocking to learn that, because we when Riva was small, like we were using Bumbo pretty much every single day, and we were taking it everywhere we go.
Oh,
So it
really?
made things, yeah, it just made things easier for her to say it. We don't need to like look for another alternative because it was so easy to carry.
Yeah,
But then, yeah, we were big users of Bumbo, but then it's a good learning.
yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like, it was advertised really well, and a lot of parents I know that go for the bumbo. But we have seen the difference, and we've seen like the bumbo really does not allow for a lot of movement. So when children are sitting, they're just stuck there. It's really difficult for them to come out of that positioning. In comparison, the upseat gives a lot of freer movement. The arms are free, they're sitting more upright. Functionally, it's a much better seating device.
Yeah,
Yeah, right. Uh,
perfect.
Next slide. Next slide, we have a discount coupon for the upseat if anyone wants to purchase it. It's Playful Strides 15. It's a 15% off, and if anyone wants to purchase the upseat, and that's their Instagram handle.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you,
Yeah,
everyone. Any questions?
I think there are a few questions that already popped up in the chat.
Okay.
But yeah, overall, just wanted to say, Munira, I mean, great session, like great learnings. We think that we know everything, right? So yeah, we watched a bunch of YouTube videos and we know everything because we have been experimenting with our child and all. But there are like so many details that I personally learned from this session. So thanks for that. So with that, I think we can open the session for questions. So yeah, I'm just so basically the questions are like there is a separate tab called Q&A.
Okay.
We are encouraging all the attendees to put their questions in that tab. And right now I have two questions from Sharon. Uh,
Yes.
the first one is what about the new generation Bumble? So it's about the product.
Yeah. So, Sharon, even with the new generation Bumbo, if you see it, it still does not, from what I have seen, it still does not have that wedging. The Bumbo, the design of the Bumbo is such that it just does not allow for upright sitting. It's way more compact. Like if you see the upseat, it's much more wider. So that wider base of support and even the positioning of the legs in the upseat, it gives for better sitting positioning. The bumbo is not really as supportive. It just the child just collapses into the bumbo. Yeah, sure. Kathy wants to say something.
Hi, as the seating therapist in the
Yes.
background. When you look at a bumbo or any seat, so any of the seats that have their knees above their hips when they're sitting in the chair, they put all the weight on their lower back. So when the weight's on their lower back, the children cannot use their trunk to pull themselves up. All they can use is flexion. And so you have the bumbo, there's a Fisher Price seat, there's a step 2 seat. They all do the same thing. There are many seats that also have sort of a more flat surface. Those are preferable over something with the knees higher than the hips. Bumbos come from South Africa, and they were meant for very young children when they're first designed, who were being seen for swallowing issues in a hospital. It was designed to have no metal in it. So it was great for those 3-4 monthers that we were working on flexion and bottle feeding. That's where they come from. And then they exploded, which is great, but it doesn't do any good for children beyond 4 months. That should be weight bearing on the sides of their thighs. So their knees should be wide and they should have weight on their sitting bones. So if you all take a seat right now and slump and put your knees above your hips, that's the position they're in the bumbo. And you can see it's hard to lift your arms above your head. But if you put your weight on your feet or weight and on your sitting bones, you can get your arms above your head way easier. So it's just about where their hips are sitting in the chair. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Kathy, and thanks, Munira. So just going on to the next question again from Sharon. I think this is more of a personal question here. Is It's like she got one from the family, and then she got a newer one as well. Wasn't she? But yeah, I think that question is answered as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll move on to the next one, which is from Sharon again. So let's see. My 5-month-old will stay up on forearms during tummy time, but when placed flat, she doesn't push herself up onto the forearms into that position. Is that wrong?
Yeah. So at 5 months, they're still just learning to do all of this. Now, when you say tummy time, first, is your 5-month-old coming onto the tummy by herself? That is what you want to look at. Okay. If she's coming onto the tummy by herself, then she's going to learn to kind of get her hands out, like I discussed, and then they start taking weight. So when you put children in tummy time, when you are putting them, like prior to say 4 months, when you're putting them into tummy time, you're still sort of adjusting them, and they stay in a position that you put them in. Okay, so when they start taking weight is when they learn to come onto their tummy. They learn to lift. As they have better head control, they will learn to take weight as well. And a lot also depends on what is her stimulation around her in tummy time. Like if she has something to look up to, if something is fascinating in front of her, then she'll want to kind of lift up and she'll go. And it's a gradual practice. So if you've sort of started, if this has just started, you want to give it a little more time. You want to spend a little more time on her tummy and give her that stimulation. Put toys in front of her, and you want to put it slightly higher at eye level. So when she's on her tummy, and head lifted up, it's at this level. You don't want to put it on the floor. Otherwise, then she's on the floor and everything is there. There's no reason for her to lift up on her forearms. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I mean, yeah. So we can move on. Again, Sharon, if you have like further questions, feel free to type in. So I have like a question from mine, like a personal question, and I think that helps a lot of parents here. So what are some of the red flags that of course, we always tell parents that, hey, every baby is different. Every baby's timeline is different. So don't worry if the baby is not doing something at 4 months. Don't go by a book or something.
Yeah.
But then there are also some of the red flags. There could be some of the red flags that parent, if they observe early enough, and they could reach out to a doctor. They could reach out to a PT. So what are some of the red flags that parents should watch out for?
So in the 4 to 7 month age group, honestly, like as you said, every child is different. So first we need to remember that there is no set time or set, a month where absolutely things will happen. Okay. And you have to give children a lot of time to explore, figure things out. A lot of the milestone development also depends on the environment around them. Like if they've had the opportunity to do it or not. Okay. But when with respect to red flags, you want to consider like a lot of the prerequisites. Like if you know you've had a child who's a preemie, like an infant who's a preemie, a child probably who's had some kind of medical issues, concerns, in the first few months of life, like 0 to 3 months of age, like then you are really kind of checking in for the milestones. You're more diligent with things. But for typically developing children, I would say till around 6-7 months, you're probably there's nothing that is a very very big red flag. Like if a child has not say rolled at 5 months or 6 months, it's not that big a red flag. You're going to look at a lot of other things, like first, has the child had the opportunity to roll? Like, how much of tummy time is the child having? Is the child, in a container more, or, a rocker more? Like those kind of things. I would say your hard red flags come probably, 10 months, 10 to 12 months of age. Like say at at 10 to 11 months, if your child is still not sitting, that is like a that's a bigger red flag for me, as opposed to a child not having sitting balance at 6 months is not that big a red flag, because it's okay.
Can I add?
Yes, and Kathy wants to add
I
something.
want to add something. I would say from a motor point of view, kids move at their own pace.
Yes.
But I would say a red flag for me would be a child who's not visually tracking or turning to sound. So usually you're looking at sensory information. So at 5 months, if you bring an object in front of a child and they don't automatically kind of pick it up on it and follow it, there might be some vision issues. So that should be looked at by your healthcare professional. The second thing is if there's a sound in the room, the child does not respond at all, they should be seeing you get an infant hearing test, but a child can fail that test beautifully just because they're just been born. So I would want to follow up hearing test if by 4 months a child is not turning to look at a sound or quieting to the sound of their parent's voice. Those are two things that say to me, there might be some hearing issues. And the other thing I would say is if I see a very stiff child, is the third thing I would go, this child's really stiff, not moving their parts of their body separately from each other by 5 months, I would be concerned. And I would just want that checked. Because you can have a child who has reflux who doesn't like to pull their body apart because it's uncomfortable. So it can be an underlying belly issue that causes that, but it also can be a sign that they have some other neurological things going on that need to be followed up. And we know early is best for those sort of things. But if I have a 6-month-old that's not sitting, I'm like, are they in a bumbo? Are they in a car seat? Are they in a rocker all the time? Do they ever get to sit on the floor? And it might be they don't sit on the floor because we have 2 large dogs and I can't leave them alone. So that's just an environmental thing. And it could be a child's not rolling because every time they start to get fussy, they get picked up. And so they never get the exposure to rolling. So if I have a 7-month-old who's not rolling, I'm starting to query it about the environment. But if the parents have let them on the floor and they've been on the floor every day diligently, at 6 months, we're seeing the doctor. Okay, so it really depends on the environment. Okay, I'm going to step away.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I mean, that really answered my question for sure. So there is one more question, and I know we are at time, but maybe we can take this one and then we'll end up the session.
Is there any signs of ASD, autism, that can be noted in this age? I think Kathy would be a better person to answer this question.
Well, the funny thing is, the research actually says motor. So the research says at 4 months, a child who has really rigid motor should be looked at for a neurodevelopmental disorder. And I'm going to be very clear that autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder, but it's not the only neurodevelopmental disorder that can be there. So there are reasons that kids can be picked up at that point and should be seeing a PT because we can lessen the function or the issues they have as they get older. And the big thing is the quality of their movement is less. So yes, they can reach with their arm, but it's like there isn't that controlled movement that Munira was talking about. So typically what we're looking at, a 4-month-old that we're seeing developmentally not at the same level, is they're kind of floppy. They don't pay attention to the world around them in the same way. They have problems working up against gravity, so they kind of are flat and hanging out. And that flat and hanging out is really just a sign of low tone, which is within the normal range, but in the lower end of it. So I would say if you have concerns about a child's engagement or paying attention, typically it's sensory and base. But if you have a concern about a child's movement, it can be a sign that there is an underlying syndrome, which autism is, a whole bunch of syndromes. And it can be there. And if there's a family history, I would bring that up to your family doctor. They actually do something called the AIMS, or the ages and stages assessment. So the AIMS is the Alberta Infant Motor Scale, and they can do it over and over and over and follow a child's development like they do height and weight. Or they can do something called ages and stages. And when children fall 2 months behind their developmental age, that's when they get cued into things to be assessed.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you so much for the answer. So yeah, I hope Divya, we answered your question, and then we are actually over our time. So Thank you everyone for joining. Hope you got some valuable information out of this session. And Munira and Cathy, thank you so much for being here and sharing your insights with us. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.